The 40 Rules of Love, Elif Shafak, to Zahir and Zelda. When I was a child, I saw God. I saw angels. I watched the mysteries of the higher and lower worlds. I thought all men saw the same. At last, I realized that they did not see. Shams of Tabriz, Chapter 1, Allah. Northampton, May 17, 2008. Birds were singing outside her kitchen window on that balmy day in spring. Afterward, Ella replayed the scene in her mind so many times that rather than a fragment from the past, it felt like an ongoing moment still happening somewhere out there in the universe. There they were, sitting around the table, having a late family lunch on a Saturday afternoon. Her husband was filling his plate with fried chicken legs, his favorite food. Evie was playing his knife and fork like drumsticks while his twin Orly was trying to calculate how many bites of which food she could eat so as not to ruin her diet of 650 calories a day. Janet, who was a freshman at Mount Holyoke College nearby, seemed lost in her thoughts as she spread cream cheese on another slice of bread. Also at the table sat Aunt Esther, who had stopped by to drop off one of her famous marble cakes and then stayed on for lunch. Ella had a lot of work to do afterward, but she was not ready to leave the table just yet. Lately, they did not have too many shared family meals, and she saw this as a golden chance for everyone to reconnect. Esther, did Ella give you the good news? David asked suddenly. She found a great job. So Ella had graduated with a degree in English literature and loved fiction. She had not done much in the field after college, other than editing small pieces for women's magazines, attending a few book clubs, and occasionally writing book reviews for some local papers. That was all. There was a time when she'd aspired to become a prominent book critic, but then she simply accepted the fact that life had carried her elsewhere, turning her into an industrious housewife with 3 kids and endless domestic responsibilities. Not that she complained, being the mother, the wife, the dog walker, and the housekeeper kept her busy enough. She didn't have to be a breadwinner on top of all this. Though none of her feminist friends from Smith College approved of her choice, she was satisfied to be a stay-at-home mom and grateful that she and her husband could afford it. Besides, she had never abandoned her passion for books, and still considered herself a voracious reader. A few years ago, things had begun to change. The children were growing up, and they made it clear that they did not need her as much as they once had. Realizing that she had too much time to spare and no one to spend it with, Ella had considered how it might be to find a job. The Veer had encouraged her, but though they kept talking and talking about it, she rarely pursued the opportunities that came her way, and when she did, potential employers were always looking for someone younger or more experienced. Afraid of being rejected over and over, she had simply let the subject drop. Nevertheless, in May 2008, whatever obstacle had impeded her from finding a job all these years unexpectedly vanished. 2 weeks shy of her 40th birthday, she found herself working for a literary agency based in Boston. It was her husband who found her the job through one of his clients, or perhaps through one of his mistresses. Oh, it's not a big deal, Ella rushed to explain now. I'm only a part-time reader for a literary agency. But David seemed determined not to let her think too little of her new job. Come on, tell them it's a well-known agency, he urged. And when she refused to comply, he hardly agreed with himself. It's a prestigious place, Esther. You should see the other assistants, girls and boys, fresh out of the best colleges. Ella is the only one going back to work after being a housewife for years. No, don't be Maud said. Ella wondered if deep inside her husband felt guilty about keeping her away from a career, or else about cheating on her. These being the only two explanations she could think of as to why he was now going overboard in her enthusiasm. Still smiling, David concluded, This is what I called, we're all proud of her. She's a prize, always was, said Aunt Esther. in a voice so sentimental that it sounded as if Ella had left the table and was gone for good. They all gazed at her lovingly. Even Evie did not make a cynical remark, and Orly for once seemed to care about something other than her looks. Ella forced herself to appreciate this moment of kindness, but she felt an overwhelming exhaustion that she had never experienced before. She secretly prayed for someone to change the subject. Jeanette, her older daughter, must have heard the prayer, for she suddenly chimed in. I have some good news too. All heads turned toward her, faces beaming with expectations. Scott and I have decided to get married, Jeanette announced. Oh, I know what you guys are going to say, that we have not finished college yet and all that, but you have got to understand we both feel ready for the next big move. An awkward silence descended upon the kitchen table as the warmth that had canopied them just a moment ago evaporated. Orly and Evie exchanged blank looks, and Aunt Esther froze with her hand tightened around a glass of apple juice. David put his fork aside as if he had no appetite left and squinted at Jeanette with his light brown eyes that were deeply creased with smile lines at the corners. However, now he was anything but smiling. His mouth had drawn into a pout as though he had just drowned a swig of vinegar. Great, I expected you to share my happiness, but I get this cold treatment instead, Jeanette whined. You just said you were getting married, remarked David as if Jeanette did not know what she'd said and needed to be informed. That I know it seems a bit too soon, but Scott proposed to me the other day and I've already said yes. But why? Asked Ella. From the way Jeanette looked at her, Ella reckoned that was not the kind of question her daughter had expected. She would rather have been asked when or how. In either case, it might mean that she could start shopping for her wedding dress. The question why was another matter altogether and completely caught her off guard. Because I love him, I guess. Jeanette's tone was slightly condescending. Honey, what I meant was, why the rush? Insisted Ella. Are you pregnant or something? Aunt Esther twisted in her chair, her face turned, her anguish visible. She took an antique tablet from her pocket and started chewing on it. I'm going to be an uncle, Evie said, giggling. Ella held Jeanette's hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. You can always tell us the truth. You know that, right? We'll stand by you, no matter what. Mom, will you please stop that? Jeanette snapped as she pulled her hand away. This has nothing to do with pregnancy. You're embarrassing me. I was just trying to help. Ella responded calmly, calmness being a state she had been lately finding harder and harder to achieve. By insulting me, you mean apparently the only way you can see Scott and me getting married is me being knocked up? Does it ever occur to you that I might want to marry this guy because I love him? We have been dating for 8 months now. This elicited a scoff from Ella. Oh yay, as if you could tell a man's character in 8 months. Your father and I have been married for almost 20 years, and even we can't come to know everything about each other. 8 months is nothing in a relationship. It took God only 6 days to create the entire universe, said Evie, beaming, but cold stares from everyone at the table forced him back into silence. Sensing the escalating tension, David, his eyes fixed on his elder daughter, his brow furrowed in thought, interjected, Honey, what your mom is trying to say is that dating is one thing, marrying is quite another. But Dad, did you think we would date forever? Jeanette asked, drawing in a deep breath. Ella said, to be perfectly blunt, we were expecting you to grow out of it. You're too young to get involved in any serious relationship. You know what I'm thinking, Mom? Jeanette said in a voice so flat as to be unrecognizable. I'm thinking you're projecting your own fears onto me. But just because you married so young and had a baby when you were my age, that does not mean I'm going to make the same mistake. Ella blushed as if slapped in the face. From deep within she remembered the difficult pregnancy that had resulted in Jeanette's premature birth. As a baby and then as a toddler, her daughter had drained all of her energy, which was why she had waited 6 years before getting pregnant again. Sweetheart, we were happy for you when you started dating Scott. David cautiously, trying a different strategy. He's a nice guy, but who knows what she'll be thinking after graduations. Things might be very different then. Janet gave a small nod that conveyed little more than. Then she said, "Is this because Scott isn't Jewish?" David rolled his eyes in disbelief. He had always taken pride in being an open-minded and cultured father, avoiding negative remarks about the race, religion, or genre in the house. Janet, however, turning to her mother, she asked, "Can you look me in the eye and tell me you'd still be making the same objections if Scott were a young Jewish man named Aaron?" Janet's voice needled with bitterness and sarcasm, and Ella feared there was more of that welling up inside her daughter. "Sweetheart, I'll be completely honest with you. Even if you might not like it, I know how wonderful it is to be young and in love. Believe me, I do. But to get married to someone from a different background is a big gamble. And as your parents, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing. And how do you know your right thing is the right thing for me?" The question threw Ella off a little. She sighed and massaged her forehead as if on the verge of a migraine. "I love him, Mom. Does that mean anything to you? Do you remember that word from somewhere? He makes my heart beat faster. I can't live without him." Ella heard herself chuckle. It was not her intention to make fun of her daughter's feeling, not at all, but that was probably what her laughing to herself sounded like. For reasons unknown to her, she felt extremely nervous. She'd fights with Janet before, hundreds of them, but today it felt as though she were quarreling with something else, something bigger. "Mom, haven't you ever been in love?" Janet retorted, a hint of contempt creeping into her tone. "Oh, give me a break. Stop daydreaming and get real, will you? You're being so..." Ella's eyes darted toward the window, hunting for a dramatic word until finally she came up with "romantic." "What's wrong with being romantic?" Janet asked, sounding offended. Really, what was wrong with being romantic? Ella wondered. Since when was she so annoyed by romanticism, unable to answer the question, tugging at the edges of her mind? She continued all the same. "Come on, honey. Which century are you living in? Just get into your head. Women don't marry the men they fall in love with. When push comes to shove, they choose the guy who'll be a good father and a reliable husband. Love is only a sweet feeling, bound to come and quickly go away." When she finished talking, Ella turned to her husband. David had clasped his hands in front of him, slowly, as if through water, and was looking at her like he'd never seen her before. "I know why you're doing this," Janet said. "You are jealous of my happiness and my youth. You want to make an unhappy housewife out of me. You want me to be you, Mom." Ella felt a strange, sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach, as if she had a giant rock sitting there. Was she an unhappy housewife? A washed-up mom trapped in a failing marriage? Was this how her children saw her, and her husband too? What about friends and neighbors? Suddenly she had the feeling that everyone around her secretly pitied her, and suspicion was so painful that she gasped. "You should apologize to your mom," David said, turning to Jeanine with a frown on his face. "It's all right. I don't expect an apology," Ella said dejectedly. Janet gave her mother a mock glare, and just like that she pushed back her chair, threw her napkin aside, and walked out of the kitchen. After a minute, Orly and Evie silently followed suit, either in an unusual act of solidarity with the elder sister or because they had gotten bored of all this adult talk. Aunt Esther left next, mumbling some poor excuse while chewing fiercely on her last antique tablet. David and Ella remained at the table, an intense awkward hanging in the air between them. It pained Ella to have to face this void, which, as they both knew, had nothing to do with Janet or any of the children. David grabbed the fork he had put aside and inspected it for a while. "So should I conclude that you did not marry the man you loved?" "Oh, please, that's not what I mean." "What is it you meant, then?" David said, still talking to the fog. "I thought you were in love with me when we got married." "I was in love with you back then," Ella said, but could not help adding. "So when did you stop loving me?" David asked deadpan. Ella looked at her husband in astonishment, like someone who had never seen her reflection before and who now held a mirror to her face. Had stopped loving him? It was a question she had never asked herself before. She wanted to respond but lacked not so much the will as the words. Deep inside, she knew it was the two of them they should be concerned about, not their children, but instead they were doing what they both were best at, letting the days go by, the routine take over, and time run its course of inevitable torpor. She started to cry, unable to hold back this continuing sadness that had, without her knowledge, become a part of who she was. David turned her anguished face away. They both knew he hated to see her cry just as much as she hated to cry in front of him. Fortunately, the phone rang just then, saving them. David picked it up. Hello? Yes, she's here. Hold on, please. Ella pulled herself together and spoke up, doing her best to sound in good spirits. Yes, this is Ella. Hi, this is Michael. Sorry to bother you over the weekend, chirped a young woman's voice. It's just that yesterday Steve wanted me to check in with you, and I simply forgot. Did you have a chance to start a work on the manuscript? Oh, Ella sighed, only now remembering the task awaiting her. Her first assignment at the literary agency was to read a novel by an unknown European author. She was expected to write an intensive report on it. Tell him not to worry, I have already started reading, Ella lied. Ambitious and headstrong, Michael was the kind of person she did not want to upset on her first assignment. Oh good, how is it? Ella paused, puzzled as what to say. She did not know anything about the manuscript except that it was an historical novel centered on the life of the famous mystic poet Rumi, who she learned was called the Shakespeare of the Islamic world. Oh, it's very mystical, Ella chuckled, hoping to cover with a joke. But Michael was all business. Right, she said flatly. Listen, I think you need to get on this. It might take longer than you expect to write a report on a novel like that. There was a distant muttering on the phone as Michael's voice trailed off. Ella imagined her juggling several tasks simultaneously. Checking emails, reading a review on one of her authors, taking a bite from her tuna salad sandwich, and polishing her fingernails, all while talking on the phone. Are you still there? Michael asked a minute later. Yes, I'm in. Good. Listen, it's crazy in here. I need to go. Just keep in mind the deadline is in 3 weeks. I know, Ella said, trying to sound more determined. I'll make the deadline. The truth was, Ella was not sure she wanted to evaluate this manuscript at all. In the beginning, she'd been so eager and confident, it had felt thrilling to be the first one to read an unpublished novel by an unknown author and to play, however small, a role in his fate. But now she was not sure if she could concentrate on a subject as irrelevant to her life as Sufism and a time as distant as 13th century. Michael must have detected her hesitation. Is there a problem? She asked. When no answer came, she grew insistent. Listen, you can confide in me. After a bit of silence, Ella decided to tell her the truth. It's just that I'm not sure I'm in the right state of mind these days to concentrate on a historical novel. I mean, I'm interested in Rumi and all that, but still the subject is alien to me. Perhaps you could give me another novel, something I could more easily relate to. That's such a secure approach, said Michael. You think you can work better with books you know something about? Not at all. Just because you live in the state, you can't expect to edit only novels that take place in Massachusetts, right? That's not what I mean, Ella said, and immediately realized she had uttered the same sentence too many times this afternoon. She glanced at her husband to see if he too had noticed this, but David's expression was hard to decipher. Most of the time, we have to read books that have nothing to do with our lives. That's part of our job. Just this week, I finished working on a book by an Iranian woman who used to operate a brothel in Tehran and had to flee the country. Should I have to told her to send the manuscript to an Iranian agency instead? No, of course not, Ella mumbled, feeling silly and small. Isn't connecting people to distant islands and culture one of the strengths of good literature? Sure, it is. Listen, forget what I said. You'll have a report on your desk before the deadline. Ella conceded, hating Michael for treating her as if she were the dullest person alive and hating herself for allowing this to happen. Wonderful, that's the spirit, Michael concluded in her sing-song voice. Don't get me wrong, but I think you should bear in mind that there are dozens of people out there who would love to have your job, and most of them are almost half your age. That'll keep you motivated. When Ella hung up the phone, she found David watching her, his face solemn and reserved. He seemed to be waiting for them to pick up where they left off, but she did not feel like mulling over the daughter's future anymore, if that was what they had been worrying about in the first place. Later in the day, she was alone on the porch, sitting in her favorite rocking chair, looking at the orangey red Northampton sunset. The sky felt so close and open that you could almost touch it. Her brain had gone quiet, as if tired of all the noise swirling inside. This month's credit card payments, Orly's bad eating habits, Evie's poor grades, Aunt Easter and her sad cakes, her dog spirits, Jeanette's marriage plans, her husband's secret flings, the absence of love in her life, one by one she locked them all in small mantel boxes. In that frame of mind, Ella took the manuscript out of its package and bounced it in her hand, as if waiting it. The title of the novel was written on the cover in indigo ink, Sweet Blasphemy. Ella had been told that nobody knew much about the author, a certain Aziz Zahara, who lived in the Holland. His manuscript had been shipped to the literary agency from Amsterdam with a postcard inside the envelope. On the front of the postcard was a picture of tulip fields in dazzling pinks, yellows, and purples, and on the back a note written in delicate handwriting. Dear Sir Madam, greetings from Amsterdam. The story I hear which sent you takes place in 13th century Konya in Asia Minor. But I sincerely believe that it cuts across countries, cultures, and centuries. I hope you will have the time to read Sweet Blasphemy, a historical, mystical novel on the remarkable bond between Rumi, the best poet and the most revered spiritual leader in the history of Islam, and Shams of Tabriz, an unknown, unconventional dervish full of scandals and surprises. May love be always with you, and you always surrounded with love. Aziz Zahara. Ella sensed that the postcard had piqued the literary agent's curiosity, but Steve was not a man who had time to read the work of an amateur writer. So he'd handed the package to his assistant Michael, who had passed it on to her new assistant. This is how Sweet Blasphemy ended up in Ella's hands. Little did she know that this was going to be not just any book, but the book that changed her life. In the time she was reading it, her life would be rewritten. Ella turned the first page. There was a note about the writer. Aziz Zahara lives in Amsterdam with his books, cats, and turtles when he is not traveling around the world. Sweet Blasphemy is his first novel and most probably his last. He has no intention of becoming a novelist and has written this book purely out of admiration and love for the great philosopher, mystic, and poet Rumi and his beloved son Shams of Tabriz. Her eyes moved down the page to the next line, and there Ella read something that ran strangely familiar. For despite what some people say, love is only a sweet feeling, bound to come and quickly go away. Her jaw dropped as she realized that this was the contradiction of the exact sentence she had spoken to her daughter in the kitchen earlier in the day. She stood still for a moment, shivering with the thought that some mysterious force in the universe, or else this writer, whoever he might be, was spying on her. Perhaps he had written this book knowing beforehand what kind of person was going to read it first. This writer had her in mind as his reader. For some reasons unbeknownst to her, Ella found the idea both disturbing and exciting. In many ways, the 21st century is not that different from the 13th century. Both will be recorded in history as times of unprecedented religious clashes, cultural misunderstandings, and a general sense of insecurity and fear of the other. At times like these, the need for love is greater than ever. A sudden wind blew in her direction, cool and strong, scattering the leaves on the porch. The beauty of the sunset drifted towards the western horizon, and the air felt dull, joyless. Because love is the very essence and purpose of life, as Rumi reminds us, it hits everybody, including those who shun love, even those who use the word romantic as a sign of disapproval. Ella was as bowled over as if she had read it there. Love hits everybody, even a middle-aged housewife in Northampton named Ella Rubenstein. Her gut instinct told her to put the manuscript aside, go into the house, give Michael a call, and tell her there was no way she could write a report on this novel. Instead, she took a deep breath, turned the page, and started to read. Sweet Blasphemy, a novel, Aziz Zahara. Sufi mystics say the secrets of the Quran lies in the verses Al-Fatiha, and the secret of Al-Fatiha lies in Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And the quintessence of Bismillah is the letter Ba, and there's a dot below the letter. The dot underneath the B embodies the entire universe. Ba. The Masnavi starts with B, just like all the chapters in this novel. Forward. Beset with religious clashes, political disputes, and endless power struggle, the 13th century was a turbulent period in Anatolia. In the west, the Crusaders, on their way to Jerusalem, occupied and sacked Constantinople, leading to the partition of the Byzantine Empire. In the east, highly disciplined Mongol armies swiftly expanded under the military genius of Genghis Khan. In between, different Turkish tribes fought among themselves while the Byzantines tried to recover their lost land, wealth, and power. It was a time to unprecedented chaos when Christians fought Muslims, and Muslims fought Muslims. Everywhere one turned, there was hostility and anguish and an intense fear of what might happen next. In the midst of this chaos lived a distinguished Islamic scholar known as Jalaluddin Rumi, nicknamed Maulana, our master by many. He had thousands of disciples and admirers from all over the region and beyond, and was regarded as a beacon to all Muslims. In 1244, Rumi met Shams, a wandering dervish with unconventional ways and heretical proclamations. Their encounter altered both their lives at the same time. It marked the beginning of a solid, unique friendship that Sufis in the centuries to follow likened to the union of two occasions. By meeting the exceptional companions, Rumi was transformed from a mainstream cleric to a committed mystic, passionate poet, advocate of love, and originator of the ecstatic dance of the whirling dervishes. Daring to break free of all conventional roots. In an age of deeply embedded bigotries and clashes, he stood for universal spirituality, opening his doors to people of all backgrounds instead of an outer-oriented jihad defined as the war against infidels and carried out by many in those days just as in the present. Rumi stood up for an inner-oriented jihad where the aim was to struggle against and ultimately prevail over one's ego, nafs. Not all the people welcomed these ideas, however, just as not all the people opened their hearts to love. The powerful spiritual bond between Shams and Rumi became the target of rumor, slander, and attack. They were misunderstood, envied, vilified, and ultimately betrayed by those closest to them. 3 years after they met, they were tragically separated, but the story did not end there. In truth, there never was an end. Almost 800 years later, the spirits of Shams and Rumi are still alive today, whirling amid us somewhere.